Welcome back to another episode of Breaking BizDev, the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Today, we welcome Leslie Blaize, a freelance writer and certified professional services marketer. She helps AEC firms capture client stories and case studies so they're ready to use in interviews, proposals, and other ways to win work. Welcome,
Woo-hoo.
Leslie.
Great. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics is case studies and storytelling and how they can be used by the AEC, architecture, engineering, construction, and also other professional services firms.
Awesome. Yeah, well, let's get into it then. So on the Breaking BizDev podcast, we like to shine a light on what's broken about the ways that architecture, engineering, construction firms go about winning new business today. So, Leslie, I'd love to understand from your perspective, why do you think storytelling is something that's broken among these firms specifically?
Well, first, I want to start out by saying that I really respect the professionals of the AEC firms. You know, they're amazing, they're talented, they add to the quality of life for clients and, their users of different facilities. But, in their emphasis, it's always often on the technical side of, how projects were solved. And what I argue is that, if you want to build, human connections, is you've got to use the storytelling to relate to your clients and prospects. So, of course, they want to hire you because you're technically advanced and know how to solve their problems. But they also want to like you. They want to know, like, and trust you and know that they can work with you. And it's going to be a great experience. And stories can do that. Project stories about how you went the extra mile. They can show how you'll be a delight to work with. And also, let's face it, people, listen to the logic, they listen to the data, but they purchase with their emotions, and they want to feel connected with you. And then you can use stories in a variety of ways. But that's one thing. It's like, hey, AEC firms out there, stories are important. When you hear a story, what happens to it? Maybe you use it at one client presentation and then it, goes away and that person disappears. But are you saving those stories? And even more important, are you seeking out those stories? Are you recognizing, are you at the top saying, hey, these stories are important. We need to encourage our clients to talk about them and to save them and to record them so that we can use them and help our bottom line. So.
100%. And you're speaking my language. I'm a big proponent of storytelling. In fact, it's one of the, I was doing some research on the history of podcasting, and, you can go as far back as, radio was introduced in the late 1800s, and, people are used to listening to voices on the radio. But I think it extends, well beyond that. Like, storytelling was how knowledge and information was passed down from generation to generation, well before hieroglyphics even, right? So we're wired as humans to learn and want to learn through stories. So I think storytelling is so important. And I guess, let's break down a little bit, beyond just, history and our own DNA. Why do you think, Leslie, storytelling is so important, and why should firms consider adopting storytelling as part of their marketing?
Because people remember stories. If you have a client interview, and if you're being smart about it, then when you're preparing your presentation, you're saying, okay, what are some good stories about this project? Or even, what are stories from other projects that may not be related, but they show that you know how to meet a timeline, or you can, deal with various challenges. So bring those in, because as a prospect, I want to know that you know how to handle challenges. And I'm going to remember if you tell a cool story about an engineer driving through the night to deliver a project, or to deliver a part. You know what? I'm going to remember that. Hey, you guys are dedicated. You care. Or I'll tell another story of a mechanical engineer who went to a construction site of a building on Christmas weekend. it was like maybe Christmas Eve day or something, and he found frozen pipes, and
Oh,
he
no.
called somebody and they solved it. And if he hadn't made that inspection, the client could have had lots of damage that would cause a lot. So do you think as a prospect you're going to remember that story? Yes, you are.
Well, and it conveys that, they're on top of it. And even on Christmas, they're looking and checking and to see if there's frozen pipes. And so that story that you just shared conveyed, a focus on the client, customer satisfaction, right? All the things that firms like to say, we understand our clients, but that story shows it. You
It
don't have to say it. You
demonstrates
can
it.
show it and demonstrate it. Exactly.
Yeah. And then in this world of AI, you're answering a proposal, and a lot of people can put the same prompts, into, AI, but you own your stories, even if it's,
That's what
maybe a few
differentiates you.
sentences. I know proposals are tight and you don't have a lot of room, but, you can find a way to say, this community had rotten water, and because of our water treatment plant, now they have pure, delightful water coming out of their taps, and it's changed their lives. They're going to remember just even those few sentences are going to make that project come alive.
Yeah, yeah, and another thing that dawned on me as we're talking through this, um, it also shows like social proof, right? And so when you
Absolutely.
can talk about your clients and that they're real people, and you can name them and you can name their business, and there's a case story on your website, it shows that there's you have done this for other businesses or other municipalities or other agencies out there. So Leslie, can you tell us about why is social proof so important in storytelling?
Okay, so actually, social proof, is very important, because think about the prospects. They're going to be hiring somebody. It's not like going out and buying, a camera or something. They're going to be connecting with a firm that the fee might be millions of dollars. They might be working with them for anywhere from 9 months to years, and they want to know that they're going to be able to get along with them. So, that's often said that when a client panel goes in and looks at different prospects, a lot of them are technically qualified. So that's not it. It's how are you going to work with this client, and how will you solve problems that come up. And so for prospects, social proof is very important. They want to know how their peers,
Yeah.
what their peers think of you. So you often see references, but I think references are required, but I don't think they're really that useful. It's because, first of all, you might call somebody, they might be having a bad day, they may not remember
It's true.
why you were good. That person may not be anymore. They might be somewhere else. Just can't remember the details. So references are standard, but maybe they aren't the best. And then you have client testimonials that you might use in your proposals or whatever, or on your website, and they give an idea of what it was like. And often I think they're pretty standard, but
Yeah.
testimonials give prospects some idea. But if you go into longer stories or even client-focused case studies, then you're really telling the story from the client's point of view. They had a challenge, and this firm came in and helped them with their challenge, and they solved it, and now there's a good outcome. And in these case studies, or even if you're using for a project update, um, you can have your project manager say about how he solved the problem. It's not
Mhm.
like it has to be all the client. You can determine what the ratio is. A true client focused case study may focus mostly on the happy client, but that it doesn't have to be that way. It can be that your project manager talks about the technical part of it and brings in more of the story of the client, or you can have a sidebar where you list things. So that's offering social proof, and the idea is to have the prospect feel comfortable with you. So
Yeah, no, I love that, and I like how how you framed that in terms of like, here's how the client solved the problem. They solved the problem, and I think that that's something in, especially in professional services and AEC and more specifically, is you are aligning yourself. Not always are you the hero of the story, is what I'm trying to get at. There are other archetypes that you as a firm can play, and one of them is the guide,
The
right?
guide.
the
Yep.
and the someone who comes alongside the client and helps them along their journey in their progression. And I think like that framing is important context here, because it sounded like you were kind of like explaining it that way, but I just wanted to draw attention to that real quick.
No, no, I think that's absolutely right. You could have the happy client be the hero. They had their problem and they figured out a way to solve it. And thank you, firm, for helping me out. We had this real challenge, and you gave us a solution that we've implemented. Now everybody's happy, including our end users.
And that's
So then if I'm a prospect, it's like, oh, I want that too.
and and that's so much more powerful when it comes from the voice of your clients themselves, and it's more powerful coming from them than someone from your own firm. So Leslie, let's talk about a little bit of about how firms can go about incorporating more storytelling into new business development. We talked about case studies a little bit, and I think that term as a format can kind of be a little nebulous at times. Like, how long should a case story be, or what should the structure be, or how in depth do we need to get? And there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice it. How do you help maybe firms make sense, and how they should wrap their heads around what a client case story is?
Okay, so well, typically case studies are 2 to 3 pages, but the process is a firm gets together and it says, okay, we want to pursue this work, or we want this part of our business to be get more of an emphasis in the next year. So what strategic projects have we had in the past that have been big success stories? And maybe, oh, let's pick one or two that we can write case studies on. And I like to call them client focused case studies, because the process is I would talk to a firm and say, okay, what is a good strategic project for you? And then can you ask permission of your happy client to be featured? And all they have to do is participate in the interview, and they can sign off on the draft. And, that's all they have to do. So then, you schedule it during the year, maybe, this time of year, you need it later on for pictures or whatever it is. And I would talk to a client and say, okay, what particular area, what do you want me to focus on in this case study? And then I will develop a list of questions that I would share with the firm and say, okay, here are the questions I'm going to ask your happy client. And then they set up a time, I interview the happy client, write up a draft, and share it with them and share it with the happy client so they sign off on it. And then you have a nice case study that can be used, a variety of ways, including business development. So if you're business developers go to see a prospect, they can share that, client relevant case study or two and say, all right, this is how it's worked before with other people. And so it shows that we could do that with you. And then you also want to make sure you're involving the business development people and the marketing people. So you don't want to go through all this and write a case study and then nobody uses it, So you can get a great return on investment for doing this case study, because you have vetted testimonials, you have pictures, metrics, and that can be used in a variety of ways. In sending to prospects, using in proposals, using parts of it in at trade shows or whatever. So, and then it's like in your back pocket. You've got this. You can go to it. So that's really a nice benefit of case studies.
Yeah, I like, you alluded to this a little bit, but in kind of my early years when I was coming up, I had a mentor, and he was very emphatic about storytelling and why that's so important. And one of the things that he mentioned was turn them into vignettes, right? So it doesn't always have to be this long drawn out story.
Right.
Distill it down to something that you can tell in 15 seconds even, or 30 seconds, and convey the main points. And then you have different levels of depth where your prospective clients could listen to the story. Maybe there's a long form podcast episode where you sit down with your clients and talk about their story. Or maybe it's a 2 to 3 page PDF, or maybe it's just a one slide with like a couple bullet points.
Right.
It seems like there's like multiple ways where you can still tell the story in different forms and fashions?
Well, let's say you have a client and you tried for many years to get a grant. Okay.
Okay.
And finally, after, pursuing it for many years, you were able to get, the client this grant. Well, that's only a few, sentences perhaps. But if I'm the prospect, I want that grant too. I want to know that you know how to navigate the system to submit a successful grant, even if it takes, many times, several times. So there's something like that where you can slice something out of it and use it. And even, like I was saying before, if you have, you've got a client interview coming up and you have something related, like you got a grant, you know how to get grants. Well, maybe it's a different kind of grant, but it shows the process and you know how to do it.
Exactly.
And,
without saying that, it shows it, but and it's implied. And I think that's like the big takeaway here is, being more empathetic. Storytelling helps you exercise that empathy muscle, and it shows that you understand certain client types. Because like you mentioned earlier, like clients are going to want to see those stories because they want to know, hey, have you helped firms like me? Right. And showing those stories demonstrates that you do understand them and you do understand their unique challenges. So, yeah, I love storytelling, and I love the way that it wraps into marketing and business development. Well, Leslie, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm really sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. But for folks that are listening, and if they want to connect with you, where can they find you?
all right, I'm on LinkedIn, Leslie Blaize. I have a LinkedIn newsletter called AEC Connect, and that focuses on case studies and storytelling. And I go into in depth on many different parts of the whole process. And I also have I'm on Substack with B2B Story Power. So I've got some articles on there. So it's something that I really believe in. I think that it's an area that needs more attention in the AEC world. And it also can be a benefit. It can really help them stand out and engage their stakeholders. And who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't want that? Exactly. Yeah. And hopefully if we could maybe change one person's perspective out there who's listening, and maybe they can embrace the power of storytelling, and maybe they can just go out and tell one vignette in their next prospect conversation, then I think we will have done our job here.
Okay.
But, Leslie, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.